back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Sarah Jane Adventure episode, Death to the Doctor, written by Russell T Davies and is directed by Ashley Way. This is the second crossover between Sarah Jane Adventures and Doctor Who, with Matt Smith reprising his role as the Doctor in this story, which also means that this is the only time where Matt Smith was written by previous showrunner Russell T Davies, which is really cool in my opinion. And also as well, this story also features the reprise return of Katie Manning as Jo Grant after she left the series back in the early 70s, after with John Pertwee as the Doctor during the third Doctor era. So that's all really cool. And it's a very big special event. It is also in some ways a sequel to the story The Wedding of Sarah Jane, as plot elements from that story continuing on from this adventure. This is a very popular story in the series. It is one of those ones where, I know I say this a lot, I just realise how great Sarah Jane is. Because I say this a lot, that a lot of people consider it the best in the series. But it's true. And one of the biggest questions in the fandom is, which is better, The Wedding of Sarah Jane or Death to the Doctor? Now, I'm not somebody who points to the definitive answer usually when it comes to people's opinions. But in my opinion, Death to the Doctor is far superior. And it is just really cool. Not only is it a good crossover, but the writing by Russell T Davies is spot on when it comes to Matt Smith's portrayal as the Doctor. His appearance in this is a cliffhanger for the next episode. So he doesn't really appear in the first half. However, this episode has a lot to offer us prior to that. In the same way to David Tennant's appearance in The Wedding of Sarah Jane. It's a very similar concept where the Doctor appears right at the end as the stakes getting higher, and then part 2 is really the main crossover event, with part 1 being the setup. However, this story I feel like has much more of a story than a setup in part 1. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's talk about the story itself. The story starts off with our crew, and they are talking to Luke Smith on the computer screen, which means that he is technically in the story as well. He only gets a small cameo here, but it's really nice always to see Luke, and it keeps that connection between Sarah Jane and her adopted son. However, Mr. Smith detects that there are a military force outside Sarah Jane's house, as we see UNIT. Also, I'd like to add that when UNIT appear, for the first time in the series since Mark of the Bane, I believe it was, the one with the Brigadier. This story reintroduces the UNIT rock theme that was introduced in the main series of Doctor Who. I believe it was series 4, where that theme was used. You know the one I'm thinking of. The main UNIT theme for the revival era of the Doctor Who. So it was really cool to hear a bit of Doctor Who music, which establishes UNIT as a much more military threat of all things, appear in Sarah Jane. Whilst this woman, I can't remember her name, she basically goes up to Sarah Jane. She's like, "Can we talk in private?" Sarah Jane's like, "No." She's Sarah Jane seems very defensive here, which is kind of understandable after her last encounter with UNIT. And UNIT seems to have been changed since it's the good old days, where it's military to the point where it's kind of dictatorship in a sense, because Sarah Jane feels really defensive about them and kind of really doesn't trust UNIT at all, which is a semi-difference to how she was back in the 70s with the relationship with the Brigadier, Mike Yates, and Sergeant Benton. So Sarah Jane asks, no, let's not talk private. Whatever you can say to me, you can say in front of the kids. Come on, tell me. To which she announces, I'm sorry to tell you, but your friend, the doctor, has passed away. He has died. He was killed. And that's like the main focus of the episode, is that the story focuses on the doctor's death, as they invite Sarah Jane to the doctor's funeral at a secret base. In this, I can't remember what it's. I want to say it's Snowdon, a mountain in North Wales, but I could be wrong. And so they go there, and you got these. They find these grass-like creatures, instead of them being green and blue, and they seem to be also time sensitive, as one of them points out to Clive that he's getting this sparkle on his hand, and that he is coming back, he is returning. And Clive doesn't know what the hell it's all about, but he remembers he's getting this like static electricity on his hand, and he's confused, he doesn't know why it's happened, it's something very strange, and he tries to keep it quiet because he's in Unit's HQ. If Unit found out, he might get dissected or something, so keep it down, keep it quiet, we'll sort this out when we get back home to Bannerman Road. And so Sarah Jane, she doesn't actually believe the doctor's dead. She has this theory that if the doctor ever were to truly die, she would sense it, she would feel it, something would be wrong with the universe, and she would know if the doctor would be dead, right? Because it's such an important event in the universe that, of course, she would know about it, wouldn't she? And so the first half of the story kind of feels like Rani tries to encourage Sarah Jane to believe that this is true. There's a great scene when Sarah Jane, she clearly isn't taking this well, and she's just like, oh yeah, it's fine, the doctor isn't dead, I'm going to investigate. I go to the funeral, but only to really investigate the death. And Rani is just like, okay, Sarah Jane, we're journalists, so we need to think about the facts. And I would love that the doctor wouldn't be dead. I would be too, it would be amazing. However, we gotta look at the facts, and all the facts are pointing to that the doctor has passed away. I love that little moment. I love how Rani's the one that comforts Sarah Jane, but doesn't actually she tells her the truth. It's like there's a big possibility that the doctor's dead, and this whole you might feel it is just kind of in your head. So they go to the funeral, and there's this bit where Sarah Jane's looking at the casket and is heartbroken, whilst we meet these creatures, the Shanxi, these giant vulture-like creatures who are described as undertakers of the universe. They are a known selective group of basically undertakers honouring great heroes throughout the universe. And they've come here, they know about the doctor, they found his body. Apparently he was so burnt that it's almost unrecognisable, and they don't let Sarah Jane open it. And they tell our characters, they found the doctor's body, Gallifrey was lost, but legends speak of his love for the planet Earth, so we take his body to the planet Earth. So they start playing this music, this gentle music, as we get flashbacks of Sarah Jane, Clive and Rani close their eyes, and we get flashbacks, mainly of the 10th Doctor, especially when we consider Clive and Rani. But Sarah Jane also gets flashbacks to Tom Baker and John Pertwee's incarnations, which is just really cool to see. However, it is kind of strange. I do find it really odd that it's the children's show that gets the classic flashbacks. Like, this show is targeted mainly to kids. Wouldn't they be really confused at the fact that there were these other doctors they've never seen before? But it's just really cool to see these flashbacks. And I remember watching it for the first time and just being like, oh my god, look, it's Tom Baker and John Fitty. That was just brilliant. But what's important story-wise here is Clive's, as he actually remembers the events of the wedding of River Song, and he remembers that at one point he tries to jump into the TARDIS, only for the doors to close, and he gets hit by this strange blue electric light, this lightning. This electricity is the same kind of electricity he has on his hand, Artron energy, a established Doctor Who energy source which Clive had on his hands that connected him to the TARDIS in some way, and his hand is playing up, and he remembers that. That is some great way of establishing it, especially in this scene where you have these characters' flashbacks to this music, which later on becomes an important part of the story, how this music affects their memories. However, they get distracted as they hear a vase smashing, and they turn around to see none other than Katie Manning reprising her role as Jo Grant after so many years. What an amazing inclusion to the series. Katie Manning just brings so much joy into her role. You can see in every frame she's in, she's enjoying this role to the extreme. Like, she is, her quirkiness, her bizarre manners, she keeps that essence of Jo Grant from the 60s. It's like she's never left the role. However, time has clearly passed, and she is this adventurer now who does lots of these protests, and she's got this kind of crazy Nana thing going on, especially when we get introduced to her son, who I can't remember his name, but when I rewatched this, I had to double take, because he's played by Vinnie Jones. He's played by Iron Fist. And I didn't even remember him being in the story, so that completely took me by surprise. And Jo Grant finally meets Sarah Jane, having two classic series companions who have never met before, finally meet each other within the series. And the scene with them talking, absolutely gorgeous. It starts off with them just being really excited. It's full of energy. This they're just giggling. They're just amazed by the fact that they finally meeted each other, and they've heard stories from one another. Sarah Jane's heard stories of Jo Grant, and Jo Grant was told by Unit about Sarah Jane, and they just got this giggly feeling, and then they kind of have this little, like, they're thinking about their time with the Doctor and how how he's passed away now. But then Sarah Jane explains her theory, and Jo Grant believes the same thing, as the both women agree that the Doctor, he isn't dead, and they give this like a little hug, and they're like, right, we've got to keep this secret to stop the monsters. But then there's a bit coming up which absolutely broke my heart, and it's not the first time this story does it. There's a lot of scenes here which really just get you teary-eyed, remembering just like all the good time, as Sarah Jane is basically describing her experiences with the Doctor, and how she said, like, the Doctor came back for her, and Jo Grant's just like, wait, what? The Doctor came back for you? He never came back for me. And Sarah Jane, she's like, you could see Sarah Jane doesn't want to say this to Jo Grant. Elizabeth Sladen's acting here is Oscar-worthy, in my opinion. It is just absolutely stunning. As you can tell by just the look on her face, she really doesn't want to tell her, and she's like really uncomfortable with telling Joe Grant about these adventures with the Doctor later in her life. But she kind of has to tell the truth because she's a journalist. She believes in telling the truth. So she tells Joe Grant about meeting up with the Doctor and how not only did he come back for her, but it was also the first of several times that they've met. They met in school reunion, in the wedding of Sarah Jane, and in Journey's End and Stolen Earth. Whilst Joe Grant is just, she can't really take it. She's just can't process the fact. And though the girls, they still get along, they're still very bubbly and very friendly with each other, which just to see them so automatically just get along, and the fact that this friendship just works so well, is just a testament. You kind of forget that these women never actually met within the main series. They just have this bundle of joy, and like I said, Katie Manning why didn't Katie Manning get her own spin-off? Joe Grant deserves a spin-off, although in this story she isn't actually named Joe Grant, because if you remember in The Green Death, Joe Grant left the Doctor to get married, so she's now Jo Jones, and she has, I believe she said, she has 7 children and 12 grandchildren with 13 on the way. That becomes this little joke at the end of the near the end of the story, which is fantastic. So Joe Grant and Joe and Sarah Jane there, trying to get their memories together, trying to find so many clues from the Doctor from their memories. However, we quickly learn that the Shang-Chi have been spying on them too, as they seem to have some sort of connection. We learn, which is what I was on about earlier, is that their music has a special resonance which basically forces people to remember, and they can kind of tap into people's memories. So basically they want the Sarah Jane and the Joe Grant to, I know she's not Joe Grant in the story, but I can't help calling her Joe Grant. But so they can kind of like access people's memories. So without knowing it, they are kind of like helping the Shang-Chi in what appears to be their evil plan. As Ronnie and Clive start following this Grask who's telling them about this kinetic energy, and they try to chase him through these tunnels to try and get to Sarah Jane to try and warn them about the Grask. However, Clive overhears the Shang-Chi basically stalking Sarah Jane and Joe Grant, and it's basically revealed to them that they are the villains. Whilst the Artron energy distracts them, and Clive and Rani tries to go back as they get chased by the Shang-Chi, as Joe Grant and Sarah Jane start having these memories, which you get a lot of footage of the Third Doctor, because both companions have met the Third Doctor, and that's the only Doctor Joe Grant has met. There's also a great moment where they both mention they've been to Peladon, referencing The Curse of Peladon and Monsters of Peladon, respectfully. And that is just so cool. I love that, they're giddy when they both realise they've both been to Peladon. It's just so giddy, the two elderly women in this story. It's just so fun to watch. And then so they start chasing around, and they meet Clive and Rani in the corridors. They're being chased by the Shang-Chi, and both the women were like, if they're villains and they're lying, that must mean the Doctor's still alive. As suddenly Clive, with a completely different voice, says, well, of course I'm alive. I thought that was obvious, Sarah, Joe Grant. Trying to keep up. And there's this bit which, I will admit, the fact that, it's a really cool scene, but the dialogue kind of makes it a bit flat. is where Clive looks at his hand, but it's the doctor's hand, and Clive is just like, that's not my hand. My hand's not white. I don't know. It's just, I think that dialogue should have been cut out. It was pretty stupid. As suddenly Clive seems to be switching positions and turns into the 11th Doctor as he just kind of like teleports with Clive. As Clive teleports onto his abandoned junkyard-like planet, as the Doctor is reunited with Sarah Jane and Joe Grant, as Ronnie and Joe Grant have no idea who this person is, but Sarah Jane realizes he's changed again, he's regenerated, as the Doctor finally reunites with Joe Grant in this adventure. The Shang-Chi then appear behind them as the Doctor's like, you've been telling people I'm dead. It's like, sorry, it is a bit early, but we can rectify that immediately. And they fire at them. It is important to note, in terms of the production of Doctor Who, that the main Shang-Chi is voiced by, what's his name? David Bradley, who would later on play Solomon in Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, and then William Hartnell in Adventure in Space and Time, only then to play the first Doctor in the 12th Doctor story, Twice Upon a Time. Twice Upon a Time? So that's important kind of casting in there. David Bradley's first role in the series is playing a giant eagle-like Undertaker. And so that's our cliffhanger, and it's a very good, intenseful cliffhanger. And as our characters are all mostly there, however, none of them can really do anything, as the Shang-Chi's power is electrifying. The Doctor is overwhelming. It does kind of feel odd though when it resolutes. The Doctor changes back from Clive, and the Shang-Chi are like confused. It's like, what the hell's has happened? And then they don't just fire another blast to stop our main heroes. Our main heroes are like, run! As the Shang-Chi start like walking past, which we just seen they had these like bolts of electricity powers. It feels very odd that they don't ever use that power again within the story. As they basically, our crew basically realizes that that woman who was working for UNIT, who told Sarah Jane about the Doctor's body being dead, must also be working with the Shang-Chi, as she was the one who must have faked the DNA tests to prove that this body is actually the Doctor's. As we get these interactions where the Doctor keeps changing from Clive, as we get these funny interactions. As the Doctor at one point takes Sarah Jane and Joe Grant with him to teleport to this another planet, as the Doctor has activated this machine that taps into Artron energy, and that is how he's teleporting with Clive, because Clive has Artron energy on his hand, which is connected to the TARDIS. The Doctor has tapped into that energy to allow himself to teleport where Clive is, swapping the two characters around. And here we get probably the most important scene in Sarah Jane. And do you know what I said at the early scene that broke my heart? Man, this moment. Sarah Jane and the 11th Doctor get on like a house on fire. They're so giggly, they're so happy, they're so enjoyable, they're back in their company. Sarah Jane is just so happy just, to see the Doctor and a new incarnation. It's, it's a very strange thing, and, she asks about his life and stuff, to which the Doctor explains that he's travelling with a couple now, Amy and Rory, who are now married and they're engaged, and he's taken them on to a honeymoon. not a honeymoon as in a wedding honeymoon, but a planet, a moon made out of honey, which is a nice little joke. But you see Jo Grant just sitting in the background, kind of quiet to herself, and she's just like, you've taken a married couple on board. I left you, Doctor, to get married, because I didn't think you would take me on your adventures if I was married. And Jo Grant basically confronts the Doctor, it's like, you never returned to me. You must have thought I was stupid. As the Doctor, it's like, no, that's not it at all. This is very important because of kind of the reputation that Jo Grant has. Jo Grant is a very beloved companion. Don't get me wrong. She is, she's one of the icons of the series. Before Sarah Jane, there was Jo Grant, who's probably one of the more popular companions of the entire series. However, a lot of people, you do have the scripts that she was given, usually put her in the classic companion role. Jo Grant is the quintessential classic companion who usually asks a lot of questions, is usually a bit, not a bit dull, but giddy, is that the word? Where she's kind of always getting in trouble as the Doctor has to kind of help her and save her. And it's only really due to Katie Manning's this pure charm and charisma that Jo Grant really works as a character back in the 60s. In the 70s, sorry. And the scene kind of confronts that as Jo Grant is just like, why, David, did you come back for me? Did you think I was stupid? Do you think I was dull? She's not like having a go at the Doctor. She's kind of like crying to herself, kind of like, kind of laughing with the Doctor with it as well. As the Doctor's just like, as the Doctor's basically explaining that, as like, you are always important to me. You are one of my greatest friends, and you mean so much to me, which is just so amazing. The Doctor would say that to Jo Grant, and the fact that it's Matt Smith continuing on the legacy of John Pertwee is just so cool. And Jo Grant's just like, I've been travelling the world in the hopes of finding you at one point, and I never did. And the Doctor's just like, oh, you are an idiot. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, we can both agree. The Doctor's just like, no, don't you see? You travelled to all those places. As he explains, he talks to Jo Grant about her adventures, but he's spot on the money. He tells her some stories that she actually has been, and then explains that she has 12 grandchildren, 13 on the way. And I love the line, it's like, he's dyslexic, but a great swimmer. As Jo Grant's like, wait, hang on, I did do those things in Bombay. How did you know that? Did you actually like watch me? As did you actually try and find me? As the Doctor points out, no, I didn't. However, in my last death, in my last regeneration, I looked back at all my friends, at all of you, and I was so proud. This was kind of a controversial thing when it came out, and I remember actually hating this line. Basically, they've retconned the 10th Doctor's regeneration. At the end of Time, 10th Doctor's last story, we saw a montage of him basically being reunited with all the 10th Doctor's companions, whose last on his list was Rose, as he was dying from radiation poisoning after saving Wilfred. And in that story, we kind of thought that we saw every single one of his interactions. However, this story basically implies that not only did the Doctor see all the 10th Doctor's companions, but he also saw every companion that the Doctor has ever had. That means like Tegan, Jamie, just everybody. Which means that the 10th Doctor's death was a lot longer than we actually thought. which does kind of take a lot away from the 10th Doctor's immediate death, and also again establishes him as the Doctor, and all other Doctors, because his death is dismissed as this big thing. However, rewatching it for this marathon, absolutely loved it. It's mainly just an excuse to have the Doctor tell Jo Grant about her adventures and realise that not only has he had looked at her at one point, but the Doctor doesn't actually look back, because after this he does, after Jo Grant is like, so you did actually go looking for me? As the Doctor basically explains that no, he didn't, he doesn't look, but there was just this one time, this one occasion where he did, and he was just so amazed at, and so immensely proud at Jo Grant and what she has done, because she's done a lot of protests, she's been travelling the world, trying to make just the world a better place. And Jo Grant, like the interaction is Jo Grant gets like teared up as well, and I started tearing up. It's just a very great emotional scene, just very well written, and it just shows that Russell T Davies just knows these characters from the inside out. Jo Grant, the 11th Doctor, like, you couldn't tell that these weren't written by the main writers, Stephen Moffat and like Barry Letts or something. It's just spot on in their writing, and that scene, like, just that scene alone is worth watching this story, as the Doctor has fixed the machine so that now it will teleport them, but won't teleport Clive to the location. So the Doctor teleports, only to discover that since they've left, Clive and Rani have been going through these air vents where UNIT have basically, the main lady in the unit has basically locked it up and tried to heat them out, and the Doctor is basically forced at one point to Sarah Jane and Jo Grant are quickly captured by the Shang-Chi. The Doctor is basically in the air vent, has to decide who to save, the children or the women. And the Doctor decides he's going to save the children, as the Shang-Chi and the woman from UNIT basically reveal their plans as they try to get Jo Grant and Sarah Jane to remember their encounters with the Doctor, but specifically the TARDIS key, as they have the TARDIS and they want the TARDIS key so they can activate the TARDIS. And Shang-Chi, who are the Undertakers, they've seen so much death and destruction throughout the universe, want to actually go back in time and stop death. This is a really cool concept for a villain, and is a very noble goal, and you kind of understand where they're coming from, which makes the Shang-Chi a very understandable villain in that sense. However, this is not the first time we've seen the concept of stopping death completely throughout all of time and space, haven't we? This is the similar story to the Time Lord Victorious. It's never brought up here that the Doctor even tried to attempt the Time Lord Victorious. Maybe it's because at that time when this was made, it wasn't actually a big deal, which is really dumb. But yeah, I don't know. I just found the parallels really interesting, as they're basically forced to remember. We also have another controversial scene where the Doctor's talking to Clive, and they're talking about the concept of regeneration. The Doctor basically explains that he can change any colour, he can be anything, whether he regenerates. And when Clive asks the Doctor how many regenerations he has, the Doctor replies with 907, or 705, sorry. This contradicts the established 12 regenerations, 13 lives concept, which was introduced back in the Deadly Assassins. However, Russell T Davies actually has explained this in interviews and stuff, where he basically established that he was never actually a fan of the 12 regeneration rule, and thought that it does kind of hinder the series because it means there's only supposed to be 12 Doctors. So he kind of put this line in to try and establish a new status quo so that we could have just constant Doctor after Doctor, because there's no way we're getting to 705 Doctors. And he also explained that that 12 regeneration was only said twice in the entire classic series, which he is kind of right. It wasn't actually, that specific rule wasn't actually brought up a lot. It was brought up in the Deadly Assassins. I can't remember if it was brought up in the Invasion of Time. 4 times, if he does mention it in Invasion of Time. There's also Trial of the Time Lord, in which, actually that number itself wasn't explained, but they do explain that the Valiard, who is, oh wait, no, it is explained because the Master says the Valiard is a combination between the Doctor's 12th and final regenerations, all of his darker selves. And it's also mentioned in the TV movie starring Paul McGann. So, yeah, it does kind of contradict that. But like I said, Russell T Davies kind of justified it to himself as it wasn't actually said that many times within considering the entire series of Doctor Who. And he wasn't actually a fan of this concept, of this idea. Because what you got to remember is, back when Deadly Assassin first aired in the 70s, that bit of establishment was actually extremely controversial. And I guess Russell T Davies was one of the fans at the time who didn't like that concept. So that's really interesting in my opinion. But yeah, this line has been completely ignored by the fan base, and at best it is usually described as, oh, the Doctor was just joking around with Clive. A lot of people seem to misinterpret that scene, stating that Russell T Davies always intended it to be a joke. However, I can confirm, looking at the information and doing my research, that is a lie. Russell T Davies was trying. He failed. He's not too bummed out about it, but he did try to imply the Doctor can regenerate more than what was originally established. So that's kind of an important scene, I guess. As the Doctor, Clive and Rani get to the door just outside, and they're trying to get Sarah Jane and Joe Grant not to remember. I also I forgot to mention Joe Grant's grandson, the guy who played by Vinnie Jones. He's in this throughout the majority of the adventure, sticking with Clive and Rani. I must be honest, he's just not that interesting. I can't remember a thing about him, personality-wise. There's this whole running thing about him that, he hasn't seen his family because they're all spread out, and he's been with his grandmother, he hasn't seen his parents. But he's not really an interesting character. He doesn't have that much to do or say, and he doesn't really have an interaction with the Doctor, which is kind of disappointing. But yeah, he just kind of blends into the background, and it's probably one of the weaker aspects of this adventure, which is kind of a shame, because like I said, Vinnie Jones in Doctor Who. That is so bizarre. But the Doctor realises their machine, its music, is essentially forcing them to remember. As the Doctor's like, Joe Grant, Sarah Jane, what I need you to do is remember all our adventures, every single moment, every single creatures. Joe, do you remember the Axons? Sarah Jane, the Zygons. Do you remember the Autons, the Master? I don't think the Master is actually mentioned, but the Nestine, the Demons, just like all of these memories, and they get these flashbacks to the classic series again, which kind of overloads the machine that the Shang-Chi have, which makes memories into physical matter, and it overloads it to the point where it starts self-destructing, and Joe Grant and Sarah Jane, they escape the explosion by hiding in the coffin that it was originally for the Doctor, as everybody is saved at the end of the day, as they have one more trip in the TARDIS back to Bannerman Road. And it's just a very nice, great, clear ending to the story. You know, our characters remember him. There's a great line where, because the Doctor tries to get Clive and Rani to remember get Sarah Jane to remember all their adventures as well. Rani mentions the Mona Lisa, and the Doctor, after everything's solved itself, the Doctor just turns to Rani and just goes, "The Mona Lisa?" and just walks off. I love that bit. Remember, from the Doctor's kind of point of view, the Mona Lisa that's in the gallery has "This is fake" written on the back of it from City of Death. So that's kind of interesting, I find. There's a lot of classic references in this story. Speaking of classic references, we get a great shot. Ashley Way's directing is a bit basic here, but he does get some great visual flares out, and he basically nails Matt Smith on the camera. Matt Smith is very photogenic, I find, and he just works well with the camera, and it makes me wish that Ashley Way had directed an episode for the 11th Doctor in the main series. And we get a scene in which Joe Grant's just like, "Wow, this new TARDIS is amazing." As it's been redecorated again after the Wedding of River Song with Wedding of Sarah Jane, where Sarah Jane sees the 10th Doctor's TARDIS for the last time. This is a completely new TARDIS. The Doctor basically offers Joe Grant to travel with them again, but Joe Grant's just like, "No, I've got all of these grandchildren, all these worlds. I'm a bit too old for all this running around chasing monsters. Besides, I'd probably get you in trouble with the Time Lords again." Because remember, from Joe Grant's point of view, she travelled with the Doctor pre-Time War. There's a great... I love when she says that. It cuts to Matt Smith's face, and you can see in his face, like, he tries to keep quiet. He doesn't say anything to Joe Grant, which is a contrast to that scene with Sarah Jane and Joe Grant earlier on in the episode, where Sarah Jane kind of has to tell the truth to Joe Grant, even if it breaks her heart. Whereas the Doctor, he keeps it to himself. Maybe kindly, but maybe he just thinks it's better for Joe Grant. Like, he kind of, in a way, finds himself superior, in a sense. Which is just, I don't know. I just really like the contrast between the two. And so... the story ends with the TARDIS dematerialising. Joe Grant just looks at Rani and Clive, is just like, "You're amazing and you're absolutely beautiful and you're going to do so many amazing things." And they wave out in a taxi as Sarah Jane basically does. They basically talk to the kids about how many people the Doctor has how many friends the Doctor has. Sarah Jane basically explains all of these people that she has heard about. She talks about how she knows about this person called Tegan, who... I can't actually remember what Tegan does now. There's this woman named Dorothy who runs a charity, A Charitable Earth, reference to Ace. And then you've got this elderly couple, Ian and Barbara Chesterton, who, according to legends, according to myth, they haven't aged since the 60s, kind of implying that something happened within their adventures which kind of stopped them from aging, which later on is confirmed not to be true. But it's just a fun little joke at the end of the day. And there you go, that is Death to the Doctor. Overall, it's amazingly written, it's amazingly entertaining. Joe Grant, Katie Manning, the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith, and just there's so much going on. However, it never feels flooded. It always feels like it's taking its time, but never in a way where it's boring or dull. it's just, there's so many great moments, there's so many great scenes, there's so much I didn't get to talk about because this video is going pretty long as it is, but it's just a very well executed story, and it makes me beg that Russell T Davies would return, because him writing for other Doctors is just amazing. He got Matt Smith spot on. It made me wish that he would write a Matt Smith story under Stephen Moffat to kind of thank you for Stephen Moffat for working for him during his time. But sadly, that was never meant to be. But this story is basically a window to what if Russell T Davies did write for the 11th Doctor. Well, I say a window into it. He did write the 11th Doctor in the story, which, just, you know, I just can't stop praising this story. Just go watch it. It's brilliant. Just go watch it. Go watch it. It's brilliant. So that's Death to the Doctor. So join me next time where we go back to K9 and his companions in 2050. So join me next time for Black Hunger. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!